Hello everyone. In this video, we will discuss the break-even point. First, I'll present how the break-even point is calculated, and second, you will learn how to master it on an Excel file like this one. Plus, if you stick around to the end, you will also get to learn 2 tips that will set you apart from the rest with regards to break-even points. Let's get started. Simply put, the break-even point, or BEP, is a mathematical calculation to determine the number of units of a product or service that must be sold for a company's revenue to exactly equal its total costs. And since the profits is equals to revenues minus costs, and revenues is equals to costs, the BEP is the point in which the company's net profit is zero. Therefore, the break-even point is nothing more than the number of units or volume of sales a company needs to achieve to not lose or make money. To calculate the break-even point, you don't need to memorize anything. You just need to follow this logic. We know that profits is equals to revenues minus costs. As discussed, the break-even point is the volume of sales so that profits is zero. So we have that revenues equals costs. Now let's break down the revenues and costs into their main components. Revenues is a function of price per unit times the number of units sold. For costs, we have fixed and variable costs, where fixed costs is a constant number and the variable cost is equals to variable cost per unit times the number of units sold. By rearranging the equation, we get that the price per unit times the number of units sold minus the variable cost per unit times the number of units sold is equals to the fixed costs. Next, let's rearrange the formula and isolate the number of units sold. Here we can make a few changes. We can substitute the number of units sold for BEP, as the volume of units sold to achieve zero profits is the break-even point. Next, the price per unit minus the variable cost per unit is also known as the contribution margin. So let's change it to. And as a result, we have that the break-even point times the contribution margin is equals to fixed cost. And to finalize, we have that the break-even point is equals to fixed costs divided by the contribution margin. That's it. You've got the break-even point formula all figured out. Simple and straightforward. Let's look at the Excel file now. This is the Excel file I'm using to calculate break-even points and make further analysis. It is divided in 4 sections. We have a break-even point calculation, we have a P&L calculation, we have a table that we can estimate number of units to be sold to achieve the break-even point, and last, we have a graph that we can see the dynamics between revenues, costs, and profit and loss. Let's go to start in the first section, the break-even point. Here, we're going to have our 3 main inputs for the model: the price per unit, the total fixed costs, and the cost per unit. And if you remember, this is all we need to calculate the break-even point. So first, I'm calculating here the contribution margin by taking the price per unit minus the cost per unit. And then I'm calculating the break-even point by getting the fixed cost and dividing by the contribution margin. That's it for the break-even point. Below here, I just have the P&L calculation for these particular inputs. And what we get in the end is the net profit. But we have to add one more thing here. How many units are we selling? So if I type here 2000, we're going to see that this is where the net profit is 0, which is the same break-even point where we have here. So we have the break-even point as 2000, and when I add this number in here, we're going to achieve the net profit equals to 0. If I were to change this number to 5000, then we would get a net profit of $150,000. But what is important in here is to understand that we only have 4 inputs in this particular model. And this is all you need to calculate break-even points and net profit. So Now, let's gonna build up the table and the graph so you can have a better understanding of the dynamics between price and cost. Let's go to the break-even table. Here we have a table with 6 rows. The first one is the units sold, where we're gonna have the number of units to be sold from 0 to 4,000. The way I calculated it is by using the formula sequence in Excel. This formula takes as argument rows, which in our case we're going to have 1 as we need a 1-row array. Then we have columns, and we're going to use 11 columns. So just type 11 in the formula. Then the start means what should be the first start number in the row we're just creating. We're going to have 0 because we want to start from 0 number of units sold. And then the step, by how much each one of the columns should increase the number of units sold. And I just typed in here 400. That's it. Then I'm going to calculate the revenue, which is the number of units sold that comes from the above cell multiplied by the price per unit. Then we're going to have the fixed cost, which for all columns is going to be exactly the reference we have here on cell F6. Next, we're going to calculate the variable cost, which is the number of units from the above row multiplied by the cost on cell F7. Then we're going to add together the fixed cost and the variable cost to get the total cost for this particular example. And last, we're going to calculate the P&L, which is the revenue minus the total cost. And that's it for the table. Next, we have the graph. In the x-axis, we have the number of units sold from 0 to 2,000, as we have in here in the first row of the table. And in the y-axis, we have the total amount of money in US dollars. Then we have the blue line, which represents the revenues for our example. Then we have the red line, which represents the total cost for this particular example. Then we have the areas. For the light blue area, we have the total fixed costs. For the dark blue area, we have the variable costs. For the red area, we have the losses. And for the green area, we have the profits. That's basically it. So let's gonna play around with the numbers now and see what happens in the graph. We're gonna change first here the price per unit from $100 to $125. And as you can see here, the break-even point was pushed to the left. If you keep increasing the price, let's say $150 now, the break-even point will go even further to the left, because now we need less units to break even. With $100, we need to sell 2,000 units, and if we change the price to $150, we only need to sell 1,000 units to break even. And this is demonstrated in the graph here below. It's going to come back to 100 now, and instead we're going to increase the cost per unit to $75. And as you can see here, we break even at 4,000 units, which is exactly the last column in our graph. That's going to decrease a little bit now to $60 per unit. And as you can see here, now the break-even point just shifts a little bit to the left. So that's the dynamics of our project. Let me go back to the start point now and still get the 2,000 break-even point. Now, let's go to the hack I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The first one refers to keeping the break-even points always in the middle of your table. Remember, if we change one of the inputs in here, the break-even point is going to jump around in your graph. Let's going to change it. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to just come here to the sequence cell, and I'm going to change the last step. I'm going to say that this is going to be equals to what? Equals to this break-even point times 2 divided by 11 minus 1. And if you close parentheses now, no matter what you do in here, the break-even point will be always kept in the middle of the table. You can change whatever input you have in the model and nothing's going to happen. The break-even point will always stick in the middle. This is the first trick. Now let's go to the second one. But before we get there, please subscribe to the channel if you learned anything from today's videos, and give a thumbs up if you like it. Let's go to the second hack now. The second hack is to create your own BEP formula in Excel. So Excel has a function that allows you to create formulas that you can use on your own. So we're going to create our own break-even formula. So how to do that? To do that, we have to use the function lambda. Let's see how that works. I'm going to type equals lambda, open parentheses. And as you can see here, the arguments we're going to need is the parameters, which are the variables of our formula. And remember, we have 3. And then the last parameter is the calculation. What is the formula for you to calculate what you're looking for? Let's see. We're going to need the price, then, comma. Second argument is going to be the fixed cost. Then the third one is going to be the variable cost. That's it. So we need the 3 parameters to calculate our formula. Last, we have to add our calculation, which is going to be what? The BEP is going to be equals to the fixed cost divided by what? The price minus the variable cost. That's it. So let me press enter and nothing happened, right? Yes, because we have to do one more thing. To add it to the Excel so that you can execute this formula, I'm going to copy everything in here. So select, I'm going to Control C, let's enter. I'm going to go to the name manager in here. And here we're going to add new. I'm going to put BEP here, which stands for break-even point, as we discussed. I'm going to just select here, delete everything, and paste what we just copied, and say OK. So now we have the formula saved in our workbook, and we're going to be able to access it by going back to the cell, and I'll type equals, and if you type BEP, you will see that our function is in here. I'm going to open brackets. That's going to be what? We have the price, so I'm going to select price, comma, the fixed cost, comma, and the cost per unit. Close brackets and press enter. And here we have. This is the formula for the break-even point. And if you change things in here, we're going to see that we always have the same numbers. We no longer need to do all this calculation here. If you save our workbook and just reopen it, you're going to always be able to type your BEP formula. So that's it for today. I hope you have enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video.